So these are the this username, and this is the password. That, I mean, password is not visible over, but I have entered the password as well. So I have connected with my database, right? And in my database, these are the databases that I have with me. These are the
Okay.
databases that I have. So I need to connect to one of the database, and then based on that, I would be able to use it. So two things. Okay, so the thing is, PSQL directly when I'm entering the data here, it already knows where the at which port and or which location my database is stored. But the thing is, and over here I'm mentioning this cell, right? So let's create another local store. We're gonna create database local store. Oh, okay, let's not create it first, right? Let's leave it. So let's say that there is a local store database, right? So I need to provide the location. So this is called data source, right? In the error, what it's calling it data source, right? And what I'm using Spring. So Spring plus data source, and what it's asking, data source URL, right? Visible, audible?
Yes, 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 yes.
So Spring we are using, and data source it wants, and URL it wants, right? So just dot URL. Cool. URL. And I'm using localhost, but it's JDBC, and I'm using Postgres. All right. And QL. And over here I'll add the local host. And then what's the default port of Postgres? 5432.
Oh, three.
All right, and let's say I want to make a local store. This is my database, right? And then Spring, again I'm using Spring, right? And there will be, but is this driver class, right? So I'm
Yes.
using Spring and driver class from the data source, right? So Spring dot data source dot driver class, and we'll put the name. Driver class name will be, you will find it in the local, in the online you will find these things, that for Postgres is postgres ql dot driver. See, for MySQL it will change this for the MySQL, and you can Google it online, you will find, right? Same when if I want to add the username, then it will be spring dot data source dot username, right? My username is Postgres. Now the final thing will be,
Password.
so it will be like same, right? Data source and then password, and mine is TestDB. All right. So this is the configuration that I have. For now, let's leave the configuration here. Then later on, we will add
Okay.
few more properties we will add for the database, right? It's a part of configuration that we can create. Now, okay, let's do one thing. Let's first in the store application. Okay, before this, we should have done this thing, packaging, and then again a new package, and controllers, and okay, service, and controller service DAO. Okay, that's enough. And one more, now we also want an entity, and that would be enough. Models not required right now. All right, so let's create a controller as well, just to make sure our system is working. And create controller. Okay, so instead of create controller, okay, what we are making, local kirana store. So what we can do, okay, but for users we require this, but we can skip the user. Okay, so we can have the order, so we can save the order, but order requires a customer. But okay, let's not add the data. All right, we can call it a order service. So order controller, and this thing we have already done earlier, right? This controller at the rate, now request mapping, order, and public void save and get mapping, it should be post.
Post mapping.
And over here what we can do is simply okay, but okay, let's not add everything at once. So you can just have request parameter, request param, and string name. All right, so this is we have done it already. All right, so name, I'm just printing the name over here, right? Nothing else, nothing new right now. So if we run this from the order and the post mapping, we can say save. And if I run this now, will it run or not run? We have provided the path, but no, okay, this Hikari, this is what, okay, nice. Earlier we used to configure Hikari, but right now it's come for free. This is for session management of, not session management, connection management. And error path, okay. So we have to see, there are 2-3 things that we have not done. We have just put the data into config into the application or property site. We haven't used it right now, first thing.
Yeah.
Another thing, we'll also see this about this local store later on. So let's make the configuration and use it. So what we can do is simply we can create a DAO, but for this also we need to create a DAO configuration. So data configuration, DAO configuration, we can create any class with any name. So let's, inside the DAO, let's create a config first, package p config, and then API and the final IMPL. Alright, so into this data configuration, you can write it database configuration based on your preference or nomenclature. Okay, just give me 1 second. Yeah, okay, so where are we? All right, cool. So see, this is a configuration file, right? So configuration we are going to use, we were using this thing before as well, right? I'm audible?
Yeah.
So now over here what I require is data source class name. All right, so what is data source class name? In the properties file, if you see data source driver class name, right? So this thing we can just bring here, right? And we have already seen we use value and region, right, to fetch data from properties file to here, right? And then dollar sign was there, and inside curly braces, right? And then what we have to do, just simply go to the application property and copy this thing, whatever you want to use. So same thing, we are going to do it again, string. So username and password, data source URL, we can just copy paste everything, data source URL. So data source URL @value, and then oh my bad, comma, and then this dollar more, and inside this just copy paste data source URL, then username and password, private string username @value, and dollar, and this. So why to copy from there also, spring dot data source dot username, and the same thing with private string password, same thing @value, and then dollar curly braces string data source dot password. All right, now now we have to use this thing, right, in our code, but this is configuration file, right? So we must be doing something with the configuration. So there are few things that we have to create. Data source. Data source is the thing which will help us to connect to the data. And what will be the data source for us? Data source will be database only. We are working
Yeah.
with the database over here, right?
Yes. Yes.
So our database will be data.
Local.
Yes, local store database. All right. So over here, and we are going to use these things, right, to connect to the data source. This is the same manual thing that we are using. So over here, public data source, and then okay, but Hikari is by default provided. So okay, but later versions have Hikari by default. Okay. So let's Hikari. Let's try Hikari data source. Okay, that's good. We don't have to do it manually as well, but I'm just showing you because earlier we used to do it manually, but if you don't do it, it will do it on its own as well. So we can remove it for a while, right? Final keyword, everyone knows, right, why we use final keyword?
Uh, it will not be child to any other class.
Okay. All right, let's not dive deep into this. There are different I mean, it depends on the place where we are using. With class level, at class level, it cannot be inherited. The class cannot be inherited. At method
Mm.
level, the method cannot be overridden, and in variable level, the variable cannot be
Modified.
changed. It will
Change.
become constant. So I
At
was using
object
it over
level.
here.
uh,
There is no object level. How?
okay.
There is class, right? Object is the instantiation of the class.
Yeah.
So how can you add with the object? All right, no worries. So over here we can just set how many maximum connection we want, right? We have 20 maximum pool size, so we can have 20 connections with the database. So what happen eventually? Okay, why it open it? Over here we can add a class file. Oh, Java class. So what will happen? My database, my application server will be here. Server will, okay, user, let's say user is here. User will send request to the server. Now the server needs to have connection with the database, right? So this is how it
Yes.
happens, right? User send request, HTTP connection happens between these two, and then the data gets transferred from here and there while the TCP connection is open. And then if server requires, if the query requires the connection to the database, then the database connection will be established, and then the data will transfer from the database to the server, and that server, then the connection will be destroyed, and then the server will provide the data to the user. But the thing is, to create the connection object again and again, because connection is not a normal object, we need to authenticate, authorize, and then the connection will be stabilized, right?
Yes.
So it's a heavy object, and why to create it again and again? So there is a
Mm.
pooling concept. Pool is a design pattern. We can do pooling of anything. If we are pooling threads, because thread is also a heavy object. So if you are making a thread pool, then it calls thread is a heavy object. If we create it again and again, it takes time. So we create a pool of it and reuse that thing again and again. Same with the connection also. If I've already created a connection, so why to create a connections again and again? Why to waste time to create a connection? Let's use the connection. If I get the database from a query 1, then don't destroy the connection. Keep it in the pool to reuse it again whenever it is required later on. Am I audible?
Yeah.
So this is how thing works. So right now, how many connection we want, right? Because there will not be a single query, right? So minimum
Mm.
20 multiple connection we can create. So I have set it to the 20 right now.
Here connection in the sense like how many queries we written to connect the database, right?
Not queries. It means that this server is having one connection to database, right? So if I
Mm.
write, instead of 20, if I write 2, then it will have 2 connections to the single
Mm.
database. So what will happen if
Okay.
a user 1 comes and it sends some query, then one connection will be used. User 2
Okay.
comes, it will give use second connection. User 3
Okay.
comes, he needs to wait because both of the connections have been used. Alright.
Mm. Mm.
So this is how it works. And now coming back to did our configuration. So 20 maximum connections we are setting over here, right? So we have multiple scenarios we have that we can handle using this. But right now, see this object ds, this is Hikari, and we don't have to do it, right? I'm just showing you. So over here you can set, okay, my bad, not get set. You can set many things, right? Logout time, maximum time, leak detection, matrices, a lot of things is here. If you want to set everything, you can use it depending on your requirements. But
Mm.
basically there are only few conditions that we set, and rest of the conditions we leave directly because it's not required, mostly. So one thing that we have entered is pool size, right? But other thing that we want to use is data source class name. All right. So over here I can manually enter same thing, Postgres SQL. Postgres SQL is, if you want, if you are typing it, make sure DS is for data source, okay, and the PG simple data source we are using. For MySQL it can be MySQL simple data source. Usually the terminologies are same, sometimes it might get changed. And what I want to add next, I want to add username. So set username, right? So username I have already user and then username. Okay, property set username. Okay, my bad. Okay, directly also we can set, so we can do this thing as well. All right, this is one thing. And another thing that we can do with this is add data source property. Over here we need to mention the property name. So the property name will be user, and the same thing will happen with the password. So I think the password is in the later version, password is also there, right? Set password. But early on what we were doing, this data source property, and then password, and then password that we have saved. From where this password is coming, it is coming from the properties file. Okay, so now the last thing that is left is, so ds source also, yes, data source is there, right? But still we will add data source property and do url, and then directly we'll do url. All right, so we have
Mm.
entered all the details because the Hikari is going to be having the connection. So what's the flow now with the Hikari? If you are using Springboot, you are by default using Hikari. You're not directly, your server is not directly talking to the database. What's happening is in between is now there is Hikari, and Hikari is having 20 database connections with me right now. And then I'm talking to Hikari, and Hikari internally is managing to these things, right? Am I audible?
Yeah.
This is only 3 I have mentioned, so let's make it 3. All right, 3 is not a good number, so let's make it 4. So, and let's even out, let's make it 5. So these are the 5 database connection that the Hikari have, and I'm treating, my server is treating Hikari as the data source. I mean, I will let you know. So my server will send request to the Hikari will internally use one of these connections and then get the request provided to the server back. So this is what we are doing over here right now. All right, so
Okay.
now what I need to do is just return the ds object data source, right? I'm audible? And by making
Yeah.
it final, I make sure that this value does not change later on. That's it. If you want to use it, it's cool. Otherwise you are, it's just a simple normal little method. If you don't put it, then it's also cool. There is no issue. There's no hardcode thing that you need to mention it all. on the fly. And this is the data source, right? But the data source needs to be used somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So what will happen in Hibernate, we don't directly consume the data source in this manner. We create a and manager bean entity. So what we'll do, this is the data source for us right now, and we have provided all
Mm.
the properties here. So now what I'm going to do is simply, and also, okay, all right. So this thing I need it as a bean, right? Because I need to use it different
Okay.
places. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a local container entity manager factory bean, because I need an entity manager, right? Entity is a database table in Hibernate in the ORM.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what will happen, entity manager will be the one person who will manage all the entities, right? And if someone wants to manage the entity, he needs to have the database connection, right? Otherwise how
Yes.
it will manage the entity. So we can add any name, data source DW I'm using for it, and then entity and manager and factory. Alright, we can change the name to it, any name we can provide, right? It's not mentioned that this name we need to provide, it's on you. But if I use that red bean, then this name bean will be created, right? If I use something
Mm.
else, then D for the data source, and I can use this as well. Just make sure that this name is unique so that no different entity managers will collide, right? Because bean with the same name will throw an error. We have already seen this in the core part of it. So now what we can do is simply do the local, see this thing we have done, right? This thing we have to create. So just copy paste this local container entity bean, and let's call it bean right now. And now this and this, cool. Little, no, nothing new we have done, a normal object creation, but over here we need to add to it, right? So
Yes.
okay, entity manager, entity entity manager bean, right? Factory bean, because it will provide the entity manager objects. So over here what I need to set, entity manager requires a data source, right?
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
audible? And I'm providing it the data source, because
Okay.
this method returns a data source, right? And for us
Mm.
Hikari is the data source, right? Not
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
exact database here. So
Yeah.
this is how we made sure that our entity manager, who is responsible to save the entities or fetch the data from the entity, will treat
Mm.
Hikari as the data source, right? Hikari data source we are using.
Mm.
All right, so we have
So
set this
it
here.
it it is like the server is connecting to data source, right? Initially. So this bean is responsible for doing that, right?
This bean, this bean will create the connections.
Yeah. Yeah.
This when this gets executed, then we
Mm.
will have this thing. Okay, the server will not be pointing over here. Then this thing, this right hand side, anything at the right hand side
Mm.
will be done.
Yeah.
And then when we are using the entity manager, we will create the entity manager object, and then we'll pass the query to the entity. Will Now what we are going to do, entity manager object will create, entity manager object will provide us a session that will not the
Mm.
server session, it will be Hibernate session, right? Entity manager
Oh.
will provide a Hibernate session, and using the Hibernate session we will try to get the data from the database. So what will
Okay.
happen over here, so server, inside the server, it's not different from the server, inside the server we will have
Mm.
entity manager, and
Okay.
entity manager treats Hikari as the data source.
Okay.
So this is how things will work. So
Mm.
we are creating this entity manager factory bean right now, which will create the entity manager later on.
Yeah.
All right, so coming back to our code, so over here we have set the database. Now there are few things that we need to know. In Hibernate there is automatic generation of tables if we ask Hibernate to create one, right? If we don't ask it, it will not create it. All right, so that's the thing with the Hibernate, so we need to mention it over here only. So over entity manager factory bean, what we have to set persistence unit. Persistence unit name, we can set it DW, it's unique as well. And now okay, one more thing that we need to know over here, the thing that I just mentioned, right? Entities can have anything. Right now let's say there is order,
Okay.
because we are creating the order service, right? So we'll go through it. Like this is entity, right? Entity
Entity.
annotation we'll use, so it will be an entity. So we'll come over here later on. So this entity I want to create, right? So my entity manager also need to know database, but it also needs to know which entities I have, right?
Mm.
So it needs the path entity manager, then it needs the path to scan,
Database.
right? Package to scan, it's also required. So where the entity is, right? To automatically create the entity or to work with it. So if I have made this order as an entity, I just need to make sure that if I copy paste this, then I can paste it here directly. So now it know
Okay.
where the entity exists, right?
Mm.
Now it know the data source. What is the data source? Now it does not know whether I'm using Hikari or it's database normal database connection. It will treat this Hikari as a data source. Now it knows
Mm.
this is the entity, right? I've just given up name, right? You can provide the different data name as well. There is no hardcode thing that you need to provide here. Now the thing is hibernate specific items we need to use over here. Hibernate JPA vendor data. All right, and it's usually adapter. It follows also the adapter design pattern. It's a part of a structural design pattern. All right, so no response, so not going to dive deep into this. So what we can set to the adapter, it's the dialect, and dialect is the most important item. So dialect. Okay. Oh, wait. Why dialect is not there? Platform. It's with the okay. This is the platform, right? And now over here we need to mention the dialect. Now
Okay.
different dialects we have. So dialect also, I mentioned it. Okay, we have to add one more property over here. So for the dialect, and what happens with the dialect is like in Hindi or in some different languages, in Punjabi we used to say, right, that the dialect has been the dialect of Uttarakhand is different from the dialect of Haryana
Mm.
or some
Yeah.
place in Haryana, right? So what eventually happens, every version of Hibernate, like every region has a different dialect, every version of the Hibernate also or the database also has a different dialect. So we need to make
Okay.
sure that the dialect we are using must be matching with the version of the Postgres that we are having or any database that we are having. Okay.
Okay.
So Spring we are using, right? And it is about regarding to the database, right? So it will be data source, right? Now the dialect part is related to the Hibernate, because Hibernate is a medium intermediary resource that will talk to the database, and if he is talking to the database, his dialect should be same as of the database that I have installed in the system, right?
Okay.
So this is a data source part, but this is of Hibernate, right? And which thing we are saying, dialect, right? DIALECT. Okay, so over here the dialect you will always find in Hibernate and dialect, right? It's same. Org we have just added. Till here it's clear, right? Why this thing is there?
Yes.
You can just copy
Yes.
paste
Yes.
it also. If you Google it, you will find these things, right? But if you
Mm.
know, then it's easy, right? We are using Spring. We are talking about the data source. We are talking about the Hibernate and Hibernate dialect. We are talking about, right? So it's again
Mm.
simple. So now if we go to over here, then the path will also be same. Org for the organization, it's basically same. Then Hibernate spelling is wrong, NETE. Then dialect, and then Postgres. If I'm using, then it will be Postgres. You will be using MySQL, then it will be MySQL, right? Postgres, and then SQL will be added. Now the version of the dialect I want to use, like Postgres version 94 if I'm using, so it will be 94. In MySQL if you are using some 13 version, so you need to put over here 13, and then there will be dialect. All right.
Yes.
So people get confused by this and they try to just copy paste. So if you have 94 installed, so you want 94, right? They keep on trying different things. They're trying, if 10 and 11 version is also there, then they are trying 11 over here, because they don't understand this thing, right? Why this thing is winning. So 11 means you have installed 11 version. But if you have 14, so backward compatibility has been provided by every software. So if even if you have installed 14 and you want to use 94, 9.4, that's what it means by 94, then it's completely cool, it allows. All right, because backward compatibility is there.
Yeah.
So this
Okay.
is one thing. And then okay, there are a few more things that we'll do, but we'll do it later on. So same thing we will do again. Okay, we'll go here in the configurations and private string and then hibernate dialect. All right, and then what are we going to do? At the rate value and then double inverted comma, dollar, then curly braces and this. All right, so we have the hibernate dialect now, so we'll put the hibernate dialect now. All right,
Yeah.
model. So clear till dialect, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One
So
more question, like 39th line, like what is that persistence unit name means? 39th
okay,
DW
it, it's it's
parameter you
it's
have.
it's it's not required. It's later on, if you want to fetch it, you can fetch it using this name, but it's not required. You can
Okay.
remove this as well. It's not mandatory part.
Okay. Okay.
In now there are few configurations of the hibernate if we want to do it. See, I'm this thing is the most is not the most recent thing. Right now, if you don't put
Mm.
all those things, Hikari is by default used, right? In the error also you can see Hikari is there, right? Why I'm showing you
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
because there is an interview question that you should be, that obviously people will ask if you are trying to apply for the senior positions, that how you manage connection pool, or it will
Okay.
be some indirect way, right? So now a lot of people
Okay.
who use the Spring Boot directly, they don't know that internally they are using Hikari, and or they will
Mm.
directly ask you what is Hikari. So most people don't answer
Okay.
this question, especially those who are learning online or who are learning directly from some different tools. So they directly provide you this thing, right? So that they don't know that internally they are using Hikari. Before, I mean, in 2020, when I used to create the microservices, I had to manually add the Hikari like this that I'm doing right now. In the new latest versions,
Okay.
it is by default provided, because connection pooling is the
Okay.
important item that one's required, right? Everyone requires the connection pooling. If you're not pooling the connection, then something is wrong with your system. And that's why freelancers and all the companies opt for Spring Boot. I think I have already mentioned this one thing. I was hired as a consultant in by one of the startups, and it was literally a startup. Only two developers were there. The owner contacted me, and then and the code base was in PHP. So, cause there was a mutual friend between us, so that's why I just joined. I know that I won't be able to do it. They were facing the scalability issue, so that's why they called me. But
Okay.
the thing was, they were having a load of only 1,000 or 2,000 users. Their user base was 2,000. Their database was not able to handle 2,000 users, right? So it was not a case of scalability. Yeah? Scalability issue arises when you are at least a lakh or 4 lakh or 3 lakh people, right? Before that, if your system is broken, then your system design is bad. So what was happening there? That this layer was not present. Okay, my bad. So this layer was not present over there. The Sikari was not present. So what was happening over every time a server, for every request, server was trying to create a request, and then it was destroying that request, this connection object. Then again,
Okay.
second request comes, it again was creating authentication. All those things is happening again. So database will become was overloaded with only 2 or 3,000 maximum users. So that's what's happening, and they were using also the Hibernate on. Oh, sorry, this Postgres only. So I'm aware that Postgres is able to handle this much load, right? 1 lakh load, 1 lakh. If you have a database of 1 lakh entities, Hibernate will treat it like very less data. It is not
Okay.
even optimized for 1 lakh. It is usually optimized for more than 1 million records. So it does not. I mean, Hibernate is created to handle large data sets, not a small data set. So it should not be an issue. Then I came. Then I know that okay, the connection pooling was not created. The connection timeout was not created. the maximum number of connections that one database can have was not connected or configured. So they have to just work on this thing, and then their services was working fine. So till 15,000 users, they didn't face any issue later on. So
Awesome.
that's why, I mean, now, because I have manually used Ikari, that's why I know these things, right? Otherwise, if I have
Yeah.
used directly, then I also wouldn't have known. All right. So now, if I want to make any other Hibernate, if I want to create any other Hibernate, first thing is that in the entity manager factory, the adapter thing I have set, I need to JPA vendor adapter. Okay. So for us, the Hibernate is a JPA vendor, right? And now, so I have set the adapter with the dialect. But if I want more Hibernate properties to be set, so for this, okay, I need to return the entity manager bean, right? So what I can do now, I have set the data source, right? But there is Hibernate properties as well, and you can say, okay, what are the Hibernate properties, right? So there are few Hibernate properties. Let's write it down, and later on we can judge. Properties is the same properties, right? This property and the property that we are using is almost same. So I can directly put it in the properties files as well. Hibernate properties. All right, and what are the Hibernate properties that I want to create? So the properties, again, I'm just creating this just to know if you have any legacy project or project with you, then you know that this is all. This is also a way in which we write the code, right? And we can call it proper properties. It completely depends on you. So what I want is, I want to put, it's a property is a key value thing, right? Over here in the properties file, this is key value thing, right? Key and value, right? My bad, key and value separated by equal to operator, right? So over here, what I can mention is the Hibernate dialect. If I want to set here Hibernate and then the dialect, and now you can say that, okay, over here, if we when we have set the Hibernate dialect, so we were using the Spring data source Hibernate dialect, right? So the first thing is there are few keys that Springboot takes on their own, and now there are some keys that we can create of our own as well. So right now we are creating Hibernate properties, right? So we don't have to mention that in the Spring we are treating it as a data source. We just need to mention that, okay, this is the Hibernate dialect part, right? So I can just put here Hibernate and then dialect, and the dialect version, if I want to add, so the Hibernate version dialect, we have already taken it from, we are taking it from the properties, right?
Yes.
And again, properties dot put. So there are a lot of properties that we can use, put start, I mean, we can enable or disable. Like for example, whenever Hibernate do something, right, like execute a query, so whether I want it to show the query that it's executing or not, right? So if I want it to show SQL, then it will be Hibernate. I want it to show SQL, right? So it will be separated by underscore, right? And it will be true. Again, you don't need to rote learn this. If you write it again and again, then it will become, I mean, you will know that, okay, this is how we write it. Otherwise, you don't need to rote learn it. It will be provided online for free. You can just Google it and you will get all these data. All right.
Mm.
So if I don't want it, I can just commit it out, right? For now, we can enable it right now. And again, if the property dot put, now there is a thing that if I want to create the tables directly, okay, let me just write it, and then I will tell you regarding this later on. So it Hibernate to ddl dot auto. DDL is, what was DDL? We have already covered this thing.
Yeah, really.
What is DDL?
Data definition language.
Yes. So this property, I'm closing it for right now. So return and then properties. There are a lot of more properties as well, but we are not doing this. You can just Google it, the different Hibernate properties that we can enable. You will get complete list. You can play with it, around with it. So now the Hibernate property over here. So over here what I can do in order to enable this thing, and simply it will be used in properties. It should be a property, right? Which
Yeah.
property? JPA we are using, right? Java persistent
Yeah.
and property. Okay, it should be there. JPA property, this is property, and hibernate properties, and that's it, right? This method to set the properties, and this method to get the Hikari as the data source.
Okay.
And okay, so that's it. So now we have set the properties using here, and we are getting it from the properties file. We could have directly get it from the properties file and put it here, but we are doing in this way so that you know that okay, this is also we have created. So now, all right, so now what we have done is we have completed the connections. So the server will talk to Hikari, and Hikari, this thing we have already created, and over here we have created the entity manager thing. So the
Yes,
entity
yes.
manager factories has been created. Now using it, we'll create an entity manager. We will treat this as a data source and start talking to the database. All right, we have already created it. We can provide the name as well. Entity manager. All right, and that's it. Hibernate property data source. Okay, cool. Now there are a few more properties, but we can see it later on, and you can play around it when you have your own time, right? And now what? Now we have order table. So configuration is fixed. Okay, but okay, still there is time. So if I run this now, right, we were getting errors earlier on as well. Okay, I don't have class not found. Org.hibernate, this dialect is not there. Okay, just give me 1 second. Give me 1 second, I'll be back.